So, when you hear the word passport, you probably picture, that little blue or red booklet sitting in a drawer somewhere.
Right, the one you frantically search for the night before a flight.
Exactly. You travel to a new country, a customs officer flips to a blank page, stamps it, and you just walk right through.
It's very simple. A single static document. Just a snapshot of permission.
Yeah, but lately, that exact same word passport is absolutely dominating boardroom conversations worldwide. But it's being attached to physical goods, the things you buy every day.
The digital product passport. I mean, it has a very tidy ring to it, right?
It really does.
It implies your new laptop or your office chair will just carry around this clean little digital booklet with a few quick stamps of approval.
It sounds deceptively simple, but let's be real, the reality of what this actually requires is kind of tearing global supply chains apart.
Well, completely. It's a massive disruption.
So today, we're taking a deep dive into a really fascinating breakdown from the AI Sustainability and Eco Ratings desk at Agentics Co. It was published in June 2026, and it totally flips this whole concept on its head.
Yeah, the takeaway they present is pretty blunt. A product passport is only as trustworthy as the data underneath it.
And whether you're, prepping for a high-stakes operations meeting, managing logistics, or you're just curious about how the physical world is tracked, this is something you need to understand.
Absolutely. Because what the source points out is that this represents a fundamental rewiring of how global commerce operates.
Right. It's a massive structural data test. And right now, most of the global economy is just outright failing it.
They are. Because underneath the surface, this isn't just some basic labeling exercise.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to understand why these incredibly sophisticated corporations are failing, we have to look at this quiet category error happening in the C-suite.
The boardroom illusion, essentially.
Yeah, exactly. Executives are treating this as a simple compliance checkbox. I mean, they ask their teams, how do we generate the passport? As if it's just about printing a QR code on a cardboard box.
Which is such a dangerous oversimplification.
Treating this like a simple label is like thinking a restaurant's health grade is just about having a piece of paper in the window, rather than actually having a spotless functioning kitchen behind the scenes.
That's a perfect way to phrase it.
Yeah.
Because, the paper in the window is merely the interface.
Right. It's just what the customer sees.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the moment a regulator or an auditor walks into that kitchen, the interface becomes completely irrelevant.
You can't just point to the sign in the window.
No, you can't. Because underneath that QR code, a digital product passport is a structural requirement. It mandates that product information must be traceable, verifiable, and continuously accessible across its entire life cycle.
From the very beginning.
Yeah, from the second a raw mineral is pulled from the earth, all the way to its end-of-life disposal or recycling.
And the Agentics breakdown uses a very specific phrase for this. They call it a live data obligation.
I love that term. Because it really captures the weight of it.
Yeah, it's not a PDF you just save on a server and forget about. It's this living stream of data landing on enterprise systems that were just, well, they were never built to handle it.
Not even close. I mean, think about your standard corporate data estate.
Right. They track inventory, process sales, handle payroll.
Exactly. They are entirely unequipped to trace, say, the carbon footprint of a specific batch of aluminum back to the exact smelter it came from in real time.
Which means companies are desperately trying to print that piece of paper for the window while their actual kitchen is on fire.
And their data is just fragmented everywhere. Different continents, different languages, completely different software platforms.
So if mapping a complex global supply chain down to the individual factory floor is this monumental task, companies obviously need time, right?
You would think so, but the timeline the authors lay out is brutal.
Under the Eco-Design for Sustainable Products Regulation, or ESPR, these requirements are aggressively phasing in right now between 2026 and 2030.
Yeah, and it's rolling out category by category. Batteries are the very first to face legally binding requirements.
Which makes sense given they're basically the bottleneck for the whole energy transition.
Right, but it's followed rapidly by iron and steel, textiles, aluminum, electronics, furniture. I mean, basically the core building blocks of modern infrastructure.
The mechanics of this rollout, though, are really what caught my attention in the source.
The 18-month window,
Yeah, exactly. Once a delegated act is adopted for a specific category, a business typically has just 18 months before enforcement begins.
which is essentially tomorrow in the corporate world.
Well, wait, let me play devil's advocate here for a second.
Okay.
To a massive global corporation, with infinite resources, 18 months might sound like a decent amount of time.
Sure, it sounds like a lot to a layperson.
Right, like they launch entirely new product lines in that time frame. So is it really that short of a window? Why is 18 months triggering such a panic?
What's fascinating here is that um, 18 months is functionally nothing when you're dealing with supply chains, because launching a new product is an internal process,
Okay, that makes sense. You control the budget.
right? You control the budget, the timeline, the personnel. But mapping a supply chain, that's an external negotiation with a labyrinth you didn't even build.
Oh, wow. Yeah, you're relying on thousands of other people.
Think about the physical mechanics of a single laptop battery. You aren't just calling your direct supplier in Taiwan. You have to trace the cobalt back to a processing facility, and before that, to a specific mine.
Somewhere on the other side of the planet.
Exactly. You're dealing with Tier 3 and Tier 4 suppliers who might not even know your company exists, let alone care about your EU compliance deadlines.
So you're basically trying to force a mining subcontractor in another hemisphere to adopt your accounting standards.
And you have to get them to agree to a single standard of verified data reporting. I mean, sometimes just finding the email address of the person who actually holds the emissions data at a Tier 4 supplier takes weeks.
Let alone getting them to send you the data in a usable format.
Right. Then you have to translate their local accounting format, verify it, link it back to your system. So 18 months. It's functionally nothing when you're attempting to illuminate the darkest corners of a globalized economy.
Okay, so if the deadline is mathematically impossible for companies using traditional methods, human nature dictates they're going to take shortcuts.
Oh, of course.
Like if you can't get the real data from the cobalt mine, you just guess, right? You use an industry average.
But the European Union saw that coming.
Right. Which brings us to the financial enforcer of this entire system, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, or CBAM.
CBAM is the hammer. It's the mechanism that makes this unavoidable.
And the source notes its definitive period just began on January 1st, 2026. It applies to importers of covered goods, so cement, iron and steel, aluminum, fertilizers, electricity, hydrogen.
And the rule is if you import these into the EU, you must surrender certificates corresponding to the embedded emissions of those products.
But the verification mechanics here are incredibly hostile to guesswork. You cannot just grade your own homework anymore.
No, the days of self-reporting are over.
To use actual emissions data to claim your steel is quote-unquote green steel, those figures must be verified by an accredited third party.
And the rigor of that verification is really what catches executives off guard. According to the article, in the first year, this requires an actual on-site audit.
Wow, not just a Zoom call.
No, an accredited inspector physically walking the factory floor, checking the meters, reviewing the power purchase agreements, and furthermore, the data is assessed against an incredibly strict 5% variance threshold.
Okay, meaning if you report, say, 100 tons of carbon, and the auditor calculates 106 tons, your entire data set is rejected.
It is entirely invalidated. You are treated as if you provided zero data.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because when you provide zero data, or your verified data gets rejected, you hit the penalty phase.
And it is a steep penalty.
Right, so if your supplier ghosted you, or you failed that 5% variance test, importers are forced to fall back on what they call EU default values.
And let's be clear, these are not gentle estimates.
No, they're conservatively high punitive markups designed specifically to punish opacity. In 2026, the markup is an extra 10%. In 2027, it jumps to 20%. And from 2028 onward, it hits a massive 30% penalty.
We really need to contextualize what a 30% markup means in a commodity market.
Because it's huge, right?
It's devastating. In industries like iron, steel, or aluminum, margins are razor thin. Competition is decided by fractions of a cent per ton.
So a 30% penalty on your embedded emissions doesn't just erode your profit margin.
No, it functionally prices you out of the European market. Your product is commercially dead on arrival.
The Agentics piece actually has this great line that synthesizes this perfectly. They say, the absence of defensible data is not a neutral state. It is the most expensive state.
It really changes the entire paradigm.
Yeah.
Sustainability data is no longer just a nice-to-have marketing asset. It is a critical vulnerability on the balance sheet.
Right. So if missing data is suddenly the most expensive line item a company has, the obvious solution is to just, get good data.
Sounds easy enough, right?
While corporations have spent the last decade boasting about their green initiatives and their massive tech stacks, why is producing this defensible data so difficult for them right now?
Because it comes down to how those tech stacks were actually built. The source points out that the current data foundations supporting most sustainability claims are essentially built on sand.
They're fragile.
Very fragile.
Mm.
For years, carbon footprints have merely been estimated using these high-level industry averages. Material claims rely almost entirely on supplier self-declarations.
So basically, a supplier just checking a box on a PDF that says, yes, we are sustainable, and emailing it over to the procurement department.
Exactly. With zero independent verification. And the carbon figures are just attached at the highest possible category average, rather than at the individual component or batch level.
Which is exactly what the new regulatory regime demands.
Right. This structural fragility was largely invisible when sustainability was just for marketing. It only shattered when the testing became structural and legally binding.
And the analysis highlights two recent developments that really expose this fragility. First, the December 2025 CBAM package explicitly tightened the reporting rules specifically to stop companies from underreporting in multi-country supply chains.
Yeah, that geographic shuffle trick doesn't work anymore.
Right. If your aluminum crosses 4 different borders before it becomes a car door, you can't just hide the carbon footprint in the confusion.
And the second point the source cites was a 2026 World Economic Forum report. It flagged that there is still extremely limited visibility over where critical materials actually originate. The historical reality is that high-resolution data simply hasn't existed.
So to really understand why that data doesn't exist, we need to look at the mechanics of data silos. The analysis draws a really sharp parallel to AI adoption in the enterprise space, actually.
It's a great comparison because companies keep layering powerful capabilities on top of fragmented systems.
Right. I think of it like trying to assemble a 10,000-piece jigsaw puzzle, but every supplier has glued their pieces to a different table in a different room in a different country.
And they're all using different shapes.
Exactly. Quality data is locked in one local inspection system over here. Supply chain logistics live in some Excel spreadsheet over there. Compliance records are stored in a completely siloed procurement folder.
And none of those systems natively talk to each other.
So wait, if a company generates a brand new digital passport and simply layers it over this disconnected patchwork, doesn't the passport just inherit every single crack in that foundation?
Absolutely. It inherits the cracks and then hands that cracked foundation directly to a government auditor.
Which brings us back to the 30% penalty.
Right. A digital interface cannot retroactively create compliance if the underlying data is flawed. You can't fix a cracked foundation by just slapping a better-looking digital document over it.
You have to fundamentally change the depth of the data you're tracking.
Exactly.
And the researchers map out a maturity progression that organizations are being forced through to achieve this. It moves in 3 stages, from documents to data to defensible data.
And currently, most organizations are struggling just to move from stage 1 to stage 2. They're just trying to digitize their PDFs.
But the regulators have already moved the goalpost to stage 3, defensible data.
This raises an important question, though. What actually is the difference between a digital product passport and a material passport?
Let's break that down. Product versus material.
So think about a smartphone. A digital product passport describes the phone as a single finished entity. It gives you a generalized overview of its assembly.
Like a summary.
Right. But the true trust and the regulatory exposure lives one layer deeper. It lives in the microscopic realities of the materials themselves. A material passport pushes traceability down to the specific component and batch level.
Okay, so it's the difference between knowing the average footprint of the smartphone model versus knowing the exact footprint of the specific gram of lithium inside the battery of the phone I'm currently holding.
Precisely. It requires a granular, unbroken chain of custody. You need the embodied carbon of that exact batch, the geographic origin, the genealogical history of how it was processed, its recyclability, and its end-of-life pathway.
All attached to the material itself.
Yes. That hypergranularity is the only thing that separates an accepted audit from a 30% default value penalty.
So what does this all mean? How does a company actually extract that level of detail? I mean, if we know the Tier 4 supplier in another hemisphere is just using a localized, messy Excel spreadsheet, how do you bridge the gap between that and this flawless batch-level material passport?
Well, the source actually details a very specific solution for this.
Right, and to impartially explain what the source presents, they point to platforms like Agentic's own AI. And looking at the architecture of how these platforms operate kind of reveals the nuts and bolts of how you actually achieve this compliance.
The mechanism relies on AI ESG platforms, environmental, social, and governance platforms powered by artificial intelligence.
Mhm.
But the AI isn't there to just write a summary of the data.
No, it's an ingestion and normalization engine.
Exactly. It represents this exact shift combining component-level embodied carbon intelligence with full lifecycle assessment, or LCA, to move away from mere estimates.
Let's walk through what that ingestion actually looks like. Because an AI platform doesn't force a remote supplier to, like, buy expensive new software, right? But
No, that would never work. Instead, it can ingest whatever messy format the supplier provides. A PDF, a photograph of a physical receipt, a local database export.
and then it uses machine learning to parse that unstructured data, extract the specific variables for energy use or material weight, and it normalizes it into a unified ledger.
It basically acts as the universal translator for all these supply chain fragments. And once it normalizes that data, it cross-references it with those full lifecycle assessment databases.
And for those who might be unfamiliar, life cycle assessment is basically the scientific methodology for quantifying the environmental impacts associated with all stages of a product's life.
Right. So integrating LCA directly into the AI platform means the system can automatically flag anomalies.
Oh, that's clever.
Yeah, if a supplier claims a certain carbon footprint for smelting a ton of aluminum, but the LCA database shows that mathematically requires way more energy than they're reporting, the platform identifies the discrepancy before the auditor ever steps foot on the factory floor.
So it completely eliminates the reliance on blind supplier self-declarations. You're replacing trust with mathematical verification.
Exactly. The entire goal is to build an intelligence architecture that can withstand the hostility of a CVAM or ESPR audit.
And that leads to the ultimate synthesis from the Agentics analysis. The market is constantly celebrating this transition from physical documents to digital data. Like it's the finish line.
But data alone is just the halfway point.
Right. And the most critical insight here, and this is a direct quote from the sources, structured data that cannot withstand an audit is simply a better formatted liability.
A better formatted liability. That is such a powerful way to put it.
It really is. I mean, imagine you've spent millions of dollars upgrading your IT infrastructure only to generate a beautifully organized spreadsheet that still results in a 30% penalty because the underlying measurements weren't batch specific.
It's pointless. The frontier market access now runs entirely through that granular defensible material layer. The QR code on the box is irrelevant if the data in the ledger cannot survive a forensic examination.
It really is a phenomenal reframing of how we think about the physical objects we interact with every day. I mean, just to summarize our journey today, we started by looking at the illusion of the passport, right? That quiet category error in the C-suite, treating this as a simple labeling exercise.
And then we navigated the sheer impossibility of mapping global labyrinths within those tight 18-month windows demanded by ESPR.
Then we examined the brutal mechanics of CBAM, where just a 5% variance in your data triggers a cascading series of default value penalties that can instantly destroy a product's profit margin.
And finally, we looked at how AI ingestion engines are essentially the only viable mechanism for bridging the gap between those fragmented, siloed supplier spreadsheets and the hypergranular batch-level material passports required for survival.
It's just an incredible journey from the boardroom all the way down to a specific microscopic gram of lithium.
It really is a total systemic overhaul.
But I want to leave you, the listener, with one final thought to mull over. Everything we've discussed today has been through the lens of enterprise compliance, right? It's governments forcing companies to perfectly track, verify, and expose the origin of every single component down to the batch level.
Right, it's very B2B right now.
Exactly. But what happens when that exact same defensible batch-level data inevitably makes its way to the everyday consumer?
Oh, wow. That's an interesting thought.
Just imagine walking into a store 3 years from now. You pick up 2 identical smartphones,
Yeah.
you scan them, and you choose not to buy one of them. Not because of the brand, not because of the price, but because the specific batch of lithium inside the battery in your left hand has a verified carbon footprint that is 15% higher than the identical phone in your right hand.
It would create a hyper-transparent marketplace. Consumers could actually punish microscopic inefficiencies in real time.
Exactly. How will that level of hypertransparency completely rewrite human buying behavior?
Yeah.
Once the kitchen is entirely visible to everyone, how does it change what we order?
That's a huge question.
It really is. And it is something to consider the next time you look at a simple label on a box. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep learning, keep questioning the systems around you, and as always, stay curious.